We have an exciting program lined up for you all today. We'll be featuring Radhika Raman Prabhu, who's traveled from his home state in, where does he live? Where? He used to live in Idaho. Anyway. He's come from another state. He'll be giving a seminar this morning on the teachings of Jiva Goswami. Also this morning, where are our Tattva Sandarbhas? We need a table full of Tattva Sandarbhas, please. Tattva Sandarbha. At least 50 or 100 of them piled right here. We'll also be offering all morning long the newly released Tattva Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami. Very important book to have. It's one out of a set of 6 that are yet to be released. This is also released posthumously. It was written, the commentary was written by Gopi Puranadana Prabhu, disciple of Srila Prabhupada, who is brilliant, a linguist, a Sanskritist, who was also trained in Srila Prabhupada's time for translation. The translator of the Sri Brihat Bhagavatamrita, which came to with great critical acclaim. And this book is very important. Radhika Raman Prabhu will be enlivening us about the importance of this and the other books in the Sandarbhas, which are written by Srila Jiva Goswami. We're celebrating today also the Divine Appearance Day of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It's also the Appearance Day of Jiva Goswami today. Yes? It's either appearance or disappearance. And to start off this morning, we're going to have a discussion about the techniques for learning Shastra and memorizing verses. Yes?
It's Jiva Goswami appearance, and it's also Lord Vamanadev.
It's the appearance day of Lord Vamanadev, the appearance day of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and the appearance day of Srila Jiva Goswami. Okay. So, how many of you here this morning are engaged in learning verses at home in your private life? I see a great number of the audience are raising their hand. And we're going to talk about some of the benefits of learning and memorizing from several sources. So, there's a term, Shastra Chakshus, which means what? Chakshu means to see, the eyes. So what we see the world not the way it is, but we see the world the way we are. And when one's mind and intelligence is clarified through Shastra, one learns to take Shastra as one's reference point to understand the world. Then we call that person Shastra Chakshu. It means one who sees through the eyes of Scripture. So, one of the great and compelling reasons for learning Shastra is so that we'll develop this kind of vision. I remember when I first began reading the Bhagavad Gita and hearing about the 3 modes of material nature, as I would walk around in my daily life, going to high school, I began to notice the differences in atmosphere in various places. As I would walk to school, I'd see the trees and forest and so forth, and experience the influence of the mode of goodness. And then getting closer to the high school, there was passion as people were driving into the parking lot and so forth. And then, there were students who were taking intoxication and smoking, and then mode of ignorance. All around us, these modes are interacting. When one becomes Shastra Chakshu, by going deeply within the Scripture, one begins to see the world in a certain way. And that keeps us connected to Krishna as our reference point. Another reason to memorize verses and to become deeply acquainted with Shastra is so that we can speak authoritatively. In the scripture it is said, Shruti Smriti Paranadi Panchachiki Vidambina Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir Utpatayaiva Kalpate. And that is that those activities and statements that are not in accord with the Shruti, the Smriti, the Panchachiki Vidhi, are a disturbance to society. And when one speaks in spiritual circles, one must quote Shastra. One doesn't simply make assertions and say, I think, or probably, maybe. Just as in a court of law, if when you present your case before the judge and you say, this is my case and here are the precedents. There are precedents from previous law cases, and there are very specific points that the lawyer will bring into the case and say the date, the time of the case, and so forth. Otherwise, it doesn't hold in a court of law. So similarly, in spiritual circles, when one's arguing a point, when one's making a point, one must refer to Scripture. This is speech in the mode of goodness. And learning some verses from the Bhagavad Gita, the important verses, and some from the Srimad Bhagavatam can equip one to speak in such a way. Jai Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan Ji Ki Jai. So also, for those who are speaking about Krishna, and everyone should be aspiring for this in whatever venue one is in to present Krishna consciousness, it improves the presentation of one's talk by being able to refer to pertinent verses. You can quote a verse, and then if you know it intimately, you can go through the word for word and talk about it, and it gives you a reference point to speak about Krishna consciousness. It's an excellent way. For instance, there's a verse in the Bhagavatam that says, Bhakti parishanu bhavo virakti ranyatra traisha trika eka kala prapadya manasya yatasnata tushti pushti shud apayano gasam. And it's an analogy used in the Srimad Bhagavatam which says that just as when one eats food, one gets nourishment, satisfaction, and one's hunger goes away with every morsel that one eats. So similarly, when one surrenders to Krishna, there's an experience of bhakti, and one begins to see everything in relationship to Krishna. And simultaneously, one's desire to engage in things that are outside of Krishna consciousness diminishes on its own. Just as when you eat food, your hunger goes away, right? And just from that one verse, if one knows the verse very well, he or she may refer to that and give a presentation just based on that verse and its various parts. And in the Bhagavad Gita 1870, Krishna says that one who studies the Shastra, or specifically one who studies this conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, worships me by his intelligence. Isn't that nice? You can imagine your intelligence as an entity, doing some kind of worship. And how do you do that? You simply engage it, because the intelligence must be engaged somewhere. People play games. I see on the airplane nowadays, people play these games where they move numbers around. Have you ever seen that? There's a grid. What's it called? Well, there's crossword puzzles for letters and words, but there's also something, I think it's from Japan, where you move numbers around. But whatever it is, what is it called?
I used to do that in class.
Sudoku, yeah. So one way or another, we have intelligence and it must be engaged. Make it beautiful. Make it nice. Should look beautiful. Okay, so the intelligence must be engaged one way or another. So if you engage it in Shastra, and thinking of verses, memorizing verses and things, then Krishna says, you worship me by your intelligence. And the intelligence becomes purified in that way. So better than getting into Sudoku or something else, one can use the same kind of exercise of the intelligence by looking at Shastra and going deeply within it. So, Krishna is known as Uttama Shloka. What does Uttama Shloka mean? What is the name Uttama Shloka? Go ahead.
Prabhuji, Uttam may be a supreme being, supreme person. So that might be Uttama Shloka.
Uttama means the highest, and then Shloka. It's like a verse, right?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, so we're getting there, partway there.
It doesn't mean the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is praised by the best of verses.
Yeah. So the best poetry, the best verses, they're all meant for Krishna. And therefore he's known as Uttama Shloka. So this way of memorizing verses is actually, all the verses we'll find in the Bhagavatam and elsewhere, they're meant for glorifying Krishna. And this is a way that we develop our love for Krishna. Shinvatan swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyan taksto hibhadrani vidhunoti suritsatam. And these verses have spiritual power in them. Punya shravana kirtana. Punya. Everyone wants some punya. But what's the best way to get punya? By just staying in contact with these shlokas. They're pregnant with punya, and when one reads them, hears them, memorizes them, it comes out because they're transcendental. Itam bhuta guno hari. They have the same quality as Krishna does. They're transcendental. So when you stay absorbed in these shlokas and these shastras, you'll get this kind of spiritual enlivenment and spiritual credit that comes from this. Very powerful. Uttama Shloka. So they purify us, they prepare us for the time of death. In the Gajendra Mokshana, we'll find that Gajendra, who had been King Indradumna in his last life, and had offended a sage, became angry at him and cursed him, you become a dumb animal in your next life. So he became an elephant, and then Gajendra was bathing one day with his family, and he got captured by a crocodile, and when he was in great anxiety, he remembered the shlokas that he had recited dutifully in his previous life. In that section of the Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada mentions that besides chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, one should also learn some stotram like Chintamani Prakara Sadmasu, like we're learning the Brahma Samhita altogether, or the Nrsimha prayers, or some other kind of stotram. And one should become very well acquainted with it. He said, because if some of my students don't happen to, if they happen to make some slip and they become an animal in the next life, they'll even be saved from that. This is how potent memorizing these shlokas are. They're indelible. They go into the heart, the subtle body, and they stay there, and one can take shelter of those shlokas at any time, even in the next lifetime. So think of it as the best investment of your time. And so here's a few quotes from Srila Prabhupada about learning verses. So read Bhagavatam, pronounce the verses very nicely. Therefore we are repeating. You hear the records and try to repeat. Simply by chanting the mantra, you'll be purified. Simply by chanting. Even you do not understand a single word of it. Simply if you chant, this vibration has got such power. Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtanaha. If you simply chant and vibrate this verse, these verses, these shlokas, it is punya shravana kirtana. One who is chanting this verse and one who is hearing this verse, he is becoming pious automatically. Pious. To become pious, one has to endeavor so much, do this, do that, but if you simply hear these verses of Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Ramananda, are we able to see, are our guests on the internet able to see the Tattva Sandarbha, the table full of books over here?
No, I have to focus the camera on it, then only they can see.
That would be nice. And give me one for now. Just one, that's good. So we're counting down the minutes until our guest speaker will arrive at 8:30. Radhika Raman Prabhu is an esteemed scholar and specifically studied the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami. Today we have the newly released, hot off the presses, in fact it's burning my hands right now, this Tattva Sandarbha available for only $25. It's a limited edition, you see, because this is a very esoteric literature, not meant for mass distribution. It's meant for those who are intimate scholars of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And we have purchased, I think, most of the copies that are available here in America, and we're going to be divvying them out today, all day long. Those of you who are on the internet and would like to purchase a copy, we'll arrange to send one to you. We'll reserve you a copy. The phone number to call in will be forthcoming. And also those who are in the audience today are welcome to take a copy home with them for $25. The Sri Tattva Sandarbha by Srila Jiva Goswami. So we're continuing with quotes from Srila Prabhupada about the importance of studying Shastra. Shall I continue? Therefore, as a rigid principle, as a what? In every temple there should be class for hearing and chanting. Without hearing and chanting, to become leader is impossible. You can become leader in the material world, but not in the spiritual world. That is, if you don't hear and chant, you won't become a leader. All leaders are readers. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam. Smarana means remember. If you chant and hear, then remembrance will automatically come. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Padasevanam. Then you will be engaged in worshiping his lotus feet, Archanam. Then you'll be engaged in Archanam, the temple worship, Vandanam, offering prayers, Dasyam, you'll engage yourself as servant, Sakyam, you'll become friend of Krishna, Atma Nivedana, and surrender everything to Krishna. This is the process. So what was just summarized? The benefits, use the microphone. What was the benefit of hearing and studying shlokas? What will happen?
That we will progressively go towards the other 7 processes.
That's nice, though. I like the way you put that, progressively. It's step by step. In fact, this is mentioned in the Shastra. Satam prasangam mamavirya sambido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana kata tajjoshana rashu apavargavartmani shradaratir bhakti anukramishati. So krama means to step. So anu means to follow. Anukramishati means step by step. One will come to the various levels of devotional service. Everyone's coming to devotional service to make some kind of advancement. Of course, that may not be true. Some people come because they're in distress. Some people come, they want money. Other people come out of inquiry about the absolute truth and so forth. But generally, we want to advance in spiritual life. So anukrama means step by step. How will it happen? This one button you push. It's the hearing and chanting button. So the verse starts, Satam prasangam mamavirya sambiro. Associate with satam, with those who are pure-hearted. And you can tell who's pure-hearted by what they're interested in hearing. And that is the characteristic of any group. If you go to a football group, they'll want to talk about football. If you go to a group of wine connoisseurs, all day long they'll talk about the different kinds of grapes and which year was the best year. Yes, there are whole clubs like that. In fact, it's all the rage here in California to be a wine taster and to know the different kinds of wine. And if you want to know about fine wine, you can go join a fine wine group. And Anukramishati, you'll become expert in tasting wine, drinking wine, feeling a little... All these kinds of things will happen just by the association and the sound vibration. It's natural. So in the same way, satam prasangam mamavirya sambido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana kata. There's a way in which, if you associate with satam, those who are determined to go back to Godhead, you'll hear a certain kind of vibration from them. It'll get into you. That's what the verse says. It'll go in your ear, it'll end up in your heart, and that's what directs you. The heart is the driver, the chariot is the body, and will go in a certain direction. Get in a Shastra group. Be around those who are hearing and chanting all the time. And naturally, you'll have step-by-step progress in devotional life. You don't have to do anything else except put yourself in that association, preaching to the choir. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam. Smarana means remember. So, Prabhupada continues, so each and every verse you should chant very perfectly, nicely, meditate upon it. What are the three things he said? Perfectly, nicely, meditate upon it. Perfectly, nicely, meditate on it. Perfectly, P-N-M. It's P-N-M. When you get your verses, you should recite them perfectly, nicely, and you should meditate upon them. This is very nice. I went for a walk yesterday. I had been on the phone, on the computer, and I had to go for my daily walk. So I thought, don't bring the phone. I left it back, and I picked up, when I walk out the door, I always pick up some shlokas to carry with me. But I didn't even use them yesterday because I walked along, and I thought, let me first recite the Brahma Samhita. So I walked from my house all the way down past Burlingame and back. It took me about 35 minutes through the park. And on the way there, as I was walking, I was remembering the verses, saying them under my breath to the Brahma Samhita, and trying to say them perfectly, nicely, and remembering them, right? And meditating upon them. And it worked. It was very nice, actually, even as I was walking through the downtown area. There were so many things going on around me, but I was thinking of the verses, and I got to some of the verses in the end, Surabhirapi Palayantam, well, in the beginning, the Brahma is saying Krishna keeps cows as pets and so forth. And I was especially taken by Sriya Kanta Kanta, Paramapurusha Kalpataravo. Kalpataravo, and I was remembering, okay, Taravo is a tree, Kalpa means they're desire trees. And I was thinking about all these scenes in my mind about the spiritual world and how it's decorated with these desire trees and so forth. And just because I've recited the verses so many times, I don't know how perfectly, there's always a way to go back and make it more perfect. But I was able to remember Krishna as I was walking along because I was remembering these verses. And another wonderful benefit of especially memorizing some stotram, like if you know a whole chapter, or if you know the Brahma Samhita, or something becomes meaningful to you, when you go to temples, one nice thing to offer to the Lord is these chapters and these stotrams that you've learned. I had one of the most wonderful experiences of my life when I was in Vrindavan with my good friend Guru Kripa, and we always chant a lot of shlokas together, especially the Brahma Samhita. And when we go to the various temples in Vrindavan, so one day we were at the Radhika Raman temple, and we got there, offered obeisance to the deities, the crowd was there. We started chanting our Brahma Samhita, as we do before the various deities in Vrindavan. And we noticed that the pujaris were starting to wrap things up. It was time to close the curtains. And so one of the pujaris came out, and he was getting ready, moving around, moving paraphernalia around, getting ready to close the curtains. And we were so intent on singing this prayer to Radhika Raman, Radha Raman, that the head pujari noticed us. And he gave the sign to the junior pujari. He said, leave the curtain open. I was so touched because they were just about to close it, and he said, okay, let him finish. And I was thinking, Krishna accepted it. He accepted it. And if you know these prayers, you can go anywhere. Like you go sit in Prabhupada's room in Vrindavan and you recite the Brahma Samhita. You know it by memory. Memorize it. Or even if you don't memorize it, take your sheet with you and sing the prayer. Sing it out. It becomes a nice thing that you want to offer to the deities wherever you go. You can offer a chapter of the Bhagavad Gita or any of these Shastra. Krishna will appreciate. So Dravida Prabhu talks about how to learn verses. He's prolific in memorizing verses, which is a good occupation. Many of you know computer language, yes? So was it a process, systematic process? You go through, it's a logical system, isn't it? So similarly, Sanskrit is very logical. There's a way in which all it's organized perfectly, the Sanskrit. The way all the sounds are lined up, it goes from the back of the mouth to the front of the mouth. It's very logically organized in the way that, first it starts with a palatal, and then it comes all the way to the dental, and then there's the aspirates and so forth. And just like a computer language, it doesn't take much. You can learn the different sounds of the Sanskrit, know how to pronounce them. Most of you already know that because your languages are so related, or you studied it when you were young. But if you don't, take a little time to do that. Here are some of the steps that Dravida Prabhu talks about. Study the Sanskrit pronunciation guide at the back of the Gita. Learn how all the letters are pronounced and what the consonants and the long and short vowels are. By the way, this document is available. It's got a lot of information in it on our website, fanthespark.com. Fanthespark.com. And you can go there, and under downloads, there's a section there on how to learn verses, and you can take this PDF file. Number 2, he said, read the English translation of a memorable verse and become familiar with it. Become familiar with it. Number 3, what was number 1? Number 1 is, go to the back of the Gita. There's Sanskrit pronunciation guide. You can learn all the sounds, and it doesn't take long. A couple weeks and you'll be an expert. How they sound, just practice it a little bit. And then number 2 was? Yeah, get familiar with the translation, with the English. Just familiarize yourself with it. Doesn't mean you have to memorize the whole thing, but become familiar with it, right? Then number 3, study the word-for-word meaning for the first line of the verse. That's his next step. Then he says, determine the meter of the first line. And there's more on that, the meter, how to do the meter. And that's important because Sanskrit has this perfect meter. And it's much easier to memorize than English. Because English has a lot of exceptions, and as far as the meter goes, it doesn't really have a meter, unless you poeticize something. But with Sanskrit, there's always a meter. And therefore, it's much easier for the mind to remember and accommodate. Next, 5, chant the first line of the verse repeatedly until memorized, keeping the meaning of each word in mind. What is that, number 5? Chant the first line of the verse repeatedly until memorized, keeping the meaning of each word in mind. So, what is the process for memorizing something? Repeat. Repetition is the mother of learning. So you have to get the repetitions in. You can't think that if you do it a few times, you're going to remember it. I have a friend who memorizes shlokas all the time, lives in Mayapur. And he said, so many shlokas. And he said, memorizing shlokas is not a problem. Remembering them is. It's just kind of interesting because, I've noticed that you really have to make it a constant and deep practice if you want to get to know verses. And there's a big difference between knowing a shloka, being able to recite it to yourself as you're walking along or sitting in your bedroom, and sitting before a class and reciting it. There's some energy that comes at you when you're speaking to others. It's more challenging, so it really has to be deep-rooted. So you must repeat these over and over and over again. So then he says, number 6, proceed to the second line, then the third, and complete the verse. So he has this system to read the English translation, memorize, become familiar with it, then the word-for-word meaning of the first line, then look at the meter, and then look at the word-for-word meaning of the second line, third line, fourth line, like that, and go all the way through. Then he has a section on Sanskrit meter, which you can look at, and I'm not going to go through that right now, but you can download this document. There's also information about that in the back of the Bhagavad Gita, about how to deal with Sanskrit meter. And I'll just read the brief section that is excerpted from the Bhagavad Gita. The above is summed up in the end of the Sanskrit pronunciation guide in the Gita as follows. There is no strong accentuation of syllables in Sanskrit or pausing between words in a line, only a flowing of short and long, twice as long as the short syllables. A long syllable is one whose vowel is long, a, I, o, e, o, re, u, or whose short vowel is followed by more than one consonant, including ha and m. Aspirated consonants followed by an H, count as single consonants. Simple stuff for all of you who know C++. That's an old one, right? Java. What is it? Ruby on Rails. You all know these things, right? If I wake up in the middle of the night and say, what's Ruby on Rails? You'll start telling me all this protocol. Okay, so here's some more on learning verses. Practice learning the daily Srimad Bhagavatam verse as it's being recited. Sometimes if you go to a Bhagavatam class, you can just sit there and it's like, all right. Or you can really apply your mind to it and see if you can memorize it. If you don't exercise your arms and your legs, you'll just become weak. And if you don't exercise your mind also, you won't know the potential. So try and see what happens. You'll be surprised. So these are a few points that I had added to this document that had worked for me over the years. One is to sing the shloka to a tune, call and response style, accompanied by mridanga, kartals, and harmonium. We do this sometimes in our classes, right? For the Bhagavad Gita, we'd say a shloka, Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tattvataha takva deham punar janma naiti ma meti sarjuna. It was very nice actually in the sing-song way, and then we'd go around the room and everyone would say it, and you could feel the spiritual energy behind the verses. And if you sing them like that to a tune, it becomes infectious. When we melodiously sing the same verse together, it stays ringing in our ears and hearts. Number 2, carry selected shlokas on index cards. Who's got an index card with a shloka on it today? Okay. Anybody else? Let's see it. Let's see your shloka. Okay, here. Just for you. Come on. It's like, let's make a deal. $1 for carrying a shloka. Anybody else? There she is. She's got it. Come on. Come on up here. See what you've won. Give her a hand. Anybody else? Okay, be ready from now on. The price is going to go up. I have some. I hope. Yep, little packet. I keep them in a plastic baggie because I love Ziploc bags. I use them for everything and traveling, whatever, because somehow or other my water bottle always leaks in my bag, no matter what I do. But in any way, to keep them nicely, you can put them in a little bag. And if you have index cards, you just carry them around and you can write the verses on these. And still, these are just such nice ways. This is such a nice method. If you have them in your pocket when you leave the house, just as part of your the way you dress, just make sure you don't leave the home without them or go anywhere. Because what will happen is you'll notice that there are a lot of gaps in your life. People will hold you up. You know, you're getting ready to go, and you know the husband's late. You know, it's like, oh, I'm still on the phone, and it's time to go. You pull out your card and look at it. wife is still doing some things, like, no problem. Take your time. I'm going to learn this shloka, right? So rather than getting, come on, we're supposed to leave 5 minutes ago. So, all right, you're going to take 5 minutes anyway, no matter what I say. So now I pull out the shloka and I look at the shloka, and now I'm happy because I have something to look at. Eka desha stitasya agner jochna vistarani yata parasya brahmana shaktis tatedam akilam jagat. Just as the illumination of fire, which is situated in one place, is spread all over, the energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Parabrahman, are spread all over the universe. This is from the Vishnu Purana 122.53. And if you even want to memorize the citation number, that's also very classy. You notice like Madhava Maharaj, when he's here, he'll be like, so from Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Volume 2, Chapter 13, verse number 41, in the third paragraph, second line, it says as follows. That's very nice to be able to do that. That's very authoritative. And this is one thing I mentioned earlier. When you're memorizing Shastra, it's like a lawyer. You go into court, and if you're ready for the case, everyone go, okay, this is authoritative. I better listen. And it also is nice so people can also go and look it up themselves. So write down, get some cards, get some little cards and write down some shlokas on the cards. I like to use a couple of colors. I'll write the shloka in black, and then I'll put the diacriticals in red. And then I'll put the translation in blue. And also what I do is right under the shloka in a different color, within the shloka, I'll leave a little gap between lines, and I'll put the word for word underneath the Sanskrit verse, so I can correlate with my eye. I can look back and forth. And if you use a couple of colors, you can get a pen. There's pens they sell. I think they're from Japan, and as you're using it, you just pull down a little lever, and it changes the color. Those are really nice for writing shlokas. And it's a nice occupation, while you're traveling on a train, while you're waiting you can sit there and write a shloka. And if you find a shloka that really is meaningful to you, or you need to learn, pull it out and take some time with the shloka. It's worthwhile. It's worthwhile. It'll give you spiritual standing to know these things. Okay, so don't miss the opportunity to learn a shloka even while stuck in line at the bank or a red light. Hearing and seeing the shloka at intervals and while in various circumstances and environments can be helpful for learning them. It's something about the way the brain works, but if you read it when you're in New Vrindavan and you read it when you're somewhere else, it starts taking on these different points of reference. Another thing that I do is I carry shlokas on I'll print out a whole sheet, like a whole chapter. For instance, I'll have say chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita. I'll print it out on a piece of paper like this. And then every time I complete the chapter, then I make a notation on the back. I'll write the date and the place I was. I'll write the number, say if it's the first time I chanted, I'll put a number 1, and then I'll write the date, and then I'll write the place I was when I chanted it. And some of the sheets that I have that I carry around from various chapters and sets of shlokas, I notice it goes on for 2 or 3 pages, and I'll think I've had that since 2004, and I've chanted it, 160 times. And then I start to notice, wow, I wonder how come I know all these verses. And then I look at it and I go, well, no wonder. I should have known it like 2 years ago, but it's because I've repeated it so many times. And I always write the date on those too, because if I leave it somewhere, then I write my address on it so somebody can give it back to me if I lose it. Next is do some research and then write something about each shloka that you're learning. A shloka really sticks when you see the context in which others have used it in lectures or in their writings, and when you read commentaries written about it. If you take the time to write an essay about the shlokas you are learning, you will feel an intimate connection with the shloka and will remember it in the context of its manifold meanings and applications. So we've done this before at Govardhan. A group of us will be out at Govardhan, and we'd be chanting every day a series of shlokas. And then we'd individually go through each one, and we'd read the purport, and then all the commentaries, and then anything related to that shloka, any lectures that Prabhupada gave on it, and you really concentrate on one of the shlokas for as long as you have material to talk about. And then whenever you see it, you see it in terms of its connection with all the other shastras and things like that. You can write an essay about it, and then it really implants it in your mind. Everyone with me so far? You want to run out and get index cards, right? Let me see if I got any more cash here. Okay. Okay, number 4, make a recording of the shlokas you are learning in your own voice and listen to them repeatedly. I've heard about a study that proves how listening to one's own voice on a given subject helps a person retain it. So I've noticed that's true. And also, I find any recording, if you can find somebody who's really expert in pronouncing Sanskrit and they have time and you can induce them to recite it for you. I've learned I remember in my old car I had a tape player, I could just keep pulling it back. And it was easy just to, even as I was driving, I just lean on the button and it would repeat the same thing over and over again. And starting with the Mangalacharna and the Chaitanya Charitamrita. I had a recording of Vaisesika Prabhu reciting that, so I had it on a tape. I just kept it in the tape player, and when I'm driving home, I'd turn that on and I'd listen to it, and I'd just keep listening to one verse over and over and over again until the rhythm would start to get in me. And I noticed that there were some tapes around in the old days of various devotees at Gurukul, some of the teachers chanting for the students, and they would go over and over again for the Upadeshamrita verses. And you'd hear the teacher chant it, and then the students would repeat it, and then now I just know them. They're in my mind. Because I heard it so many times from the recording. So that's another way that you can sort of expose yourself to the sound vibration, and I recommend that. Number 5, keep the shloka that you're learning by the phone. So you have your shloka, put it by the phone. When appropriate, before getting off each call, ask the person you're talking to if they'd like to hear one verse that you're learning. If they agree, read them the shloka. This usually leads to more discussion about the shloka that helps you to remember it. In a similar vein, add the shloka you are learning to the end of an email or letter that you send, citing it as a point of interest. So, use it in all different contexts. And by the phone, everyone's in a hurry, and they say, one thing before you go, let me just read you this one verse, and then we'll hang up. And it passes on that vibration to other people, and you'll get used to telling it to other people. And they may say, oh, I know that verse, I heard it from such and such, and here's something that so bring it up, right? So, here's something I'm going to read from Sureshwar Prabhu, who memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita, all 700 verses. It took him 6 years. And you want to know how he did it, right? No, I don't want to know. Let's stop right now, right? You want to know? Okay, here it goes. He writes, as Rohini Nandan Prabhu points out, we have to regularly review the verses we learn to keep them fresh for use. But there is something else we can do to retain verses, and that is to connect them to our feelings. As a young brahmachari in the 1970s, by Prabhupada's mercy, I was able to memorize all the Gita's 700 verses. During the 6 years it took me to do this, I had a system of learning new verses while regularly reviewing the ones already learned. I was organized and regulated, and what made the verses stick was how I lived with them. When I would start to learn a new verse, I would write it on an index card, the Sanskrit, the word meanings, and the English translation. After studying the verse, I would put the index card in my shirt pocket and make the verse my motto for the day, my slogan, my philosophy of life. Whatever happened to me, I would relate it to my new verse until I knew it by heart. You know a verse for good when you can recall it no matter what the time it is or what mood you're in. That usually took me about 3 days. During those 3 days or so much would happen, so many thoughts and feelings, but the verse was always there for me. I belonged to the verse, and the verse belonged to me. I was meeting my dearmost friend, Lord Krishna, in sacred sound. In the Nectar of Devotion chapter, Techniques of Hearing and Remembering, Under the heading, Expecting the Lord's Mercy, Srila Prabhupada quotes a famous verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam 10:14-8. My dear Lord, any person who is constantly awaiting your causeless mercy to be bestowed upon him and who goes on suffering the resultant actions of his past misdeeds, offering you respectful obeisances from the core of his heart, is surely eligible to become liberated, for it has become his rightful claim. After citing the verse, Prabhupada remarks that this verse from the Bhagavatam should be the guide of all devotees. That's what my Gita verses became for me, my guides and dearmost friends. They are found in sound. They are found in sound. Eternal he is, cognizant he is, but ultimately he is sentient. Absolute is sentient, capable of the deepest, everlasting feelings. Likewise, whatever we have strong feelings about, we easily remember. And when we connect our feelings to Lord Krishna's, as he expresses himself through Shastra, the experience of those feelings, called bhakti rasa, eventually turns into eternity. That's from the preface of the Nectar Devotion. Practice the art of connecting the words of the verses to your spirit's deepest feelings, and you'll retain those verses forever. So another point about that I've found in my life remembering verses is I use them in my daily worship of Krishna. So when I do my puja in the morning for my shalagrams and giriraj and Gaurnitai, if I integrate the verses into the puja, then somehow or other, by their mercy, I very quickly assimilate them. At least that's how I perceive it. Either that, or because I don't even notice how time's going by and I have to do the puja anyway, that I'm repeating it so many times. But if you integrate it into a part of the thing that you do. For instance, when I was in New York City, 340 West 55th, I had a book, and every morning when I'd come before the deities for greeting the deities, I'd read many of the prayers from the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And because of that, of reciting those prayers, because of something I read, the Prabhupada said about how important it is, these verses from the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, now they became familiar to me because I would read them for Shri Shri Radha Govinda. So these are some ideas about memorizing verses. Main thing is exposure. Get involved. Get these verses. Don't become overwhelmed and think there's too many verses, how can I learn them all? Just learn one verse at a time and become familiar with it and just see the benefit of connecting with Krishna through the verses. And even if you learn only one part of the verse, that's eternally valuable also. There's so many verses that we can't learn them all. And now we're counting down the time, which seems imminent, that His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu will be here. The great added benefit is that our very dear Srivas Pandit Prabhu is back. Let's please welcome him back. Practically, we were like dead people walking while he was away. Somehow, I don't know how, shamelessly we survived. But now that he's back, we're feeling, great energy that our Shastradhan and our Bhakti Vaibhav leader is here, fearless leader in the Shastra. So we welcome him back. And we're really hoping that he brought Radhika Raman with him. So Radhika Raman Prabhu is in the building. He's going to be coming outside through these doors in just a few minutes. We want to give him a rousing applause, maybe even stand up when he comes in to greet him. And I want to remind everyone who are viewers online this morning, thank you for joining us. All day long, we're going to be offering the Tattva Sandarbha. This most precious, valuable book is available now through the BBT. However, we bought most of the copies. I just want to warn you. We arranged for them to be sent to America, and we snapped them all up, not out of greed, but because we wanted to make sure that they were all distributed. So today, we have just a small number of the books very nicely lined up. They need a couple flowers on here if you can. On this table over here, and they'll be offering them. So let's please welcome His Holiness Radhika Raman Prabhu. Hare Krishna. We'll give him a little time to offer his obeisances, and then we'll invite him to come up here and begin the seminar about Jiva Goswami and the Satsandarbha. Okay, and so one order has come in over the phone from Folsom, and who is that? Asit Prabhu. Thank you very much for your order of the Sri Tattva Sandarbha. They're going for $25, and there are limited copies available. And those of you who want to order, you can call in. What is the call-in number for ordering this morning? Do we have a standard number? 408-203-2223. That's 408-203-2223. That's 408-203-2223. So you can call in now or text in, and we will reserve you a copy of the Sri Tattva Sandarbha. If you'd like it mailed to you, we have a mailing service as well. And we thank you very much for joining the broadcast here from the live studios of ISKCON of Silicon Valley. Hare Krishna.